Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent for leave to engage in a colloquy with Senator Barrasso for a period of time not to exceed 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the President of the United States has spent the last few weeks campaigning around our great country at taxpayer expense, telling Americans about what he characterized as the catastrophic impact of the sequester. He said, for example, that the sequester will visit hardship on a whole lot of people. He said it will jeopardize our military readiness. It will eviscerate job-creating investments in education and energy and medical research. He said the ability of emergency responders to help communities respond to and recover from disasters will be disregarded. Border Patrol agents will see their hours reduced. FBI agents will be furloughed. He said that federal prosecutors will have to close cases and simply let criminals go. Air traffic controllers and airport security will see cutbacks, which means more delays at airports across the country. He said that thousands of teachers and educators will be laid off and that tens of thousands of parents will have to scramble to find childcare for their kids. And he also continued, hundreds of thousands of Americans will lose access to primary care and preventive care like flu vaccinations and cancer screenings. Today, we see the predictions of doom and gloom have not come to pass, and we've seen that many of these statements have been severely exaggerated, if not disproven. People in my home state of Utah have found the effects of the sequester to be not quite what the President predicted. One of our local Utah news stations reported that there were, quote, no signs of sequester pain, close quote, at the airports. When asked about sequestration, one Utahn responded, if they can't handle a 2% reduction in spending, then I guess we need to get better and brighter, meaning get better and brighter people to be running our government. Other press reports indicate the administration's doomsday claims have misled the public. The Washington Post reported that the Education Secretary's claims about teacher layoffs turned out simply not to be true. And Politico recently published a story showing the President's claims about some Capitol staff getting pay cuts to be false. So I ask you, Senator Barrasso, after all these scare tactics over the last 2 weeks, does the President have a credibility problem with the American people when it comes to the sequester?
Well, Madam President, I believe that my friend from Utah is absolutely correct. There is a credibility gap here. These modest cuts should prompt Washington to take a closer look at how we spend taxpayers' money. I saw today that the White House is now, because they claim because of the sequester, canceling White House tours. I mean, astonishing when they say they're not going to cut the personnel there in terms of the security, but they're going to cancel the tours. Well, I would invite people from all around the country who are planning trips to Washington to come to the Senate, come to the House, come to the Capitol. We will make sure that they receive tours if they'd like. But you talk about the loss of credibility. There's the Washington Post evaluates statements by folks, and over the last week there has been they give what are called Pinocchios for those not telling the truth. And there have been a parade of Pinocchios, a dozen of these Pinocchios given. One with the President's false claim on Friday during his news conference of Capitol janitors receiving a pay cut. They gave him 4 Pinocchios for that, just not true. On the threat to free meals for seniors, Pinocchios there. The Secretary of Education's false claim of pink slips for teachers, another 4 Pinocchios. The claim that 70,000 children would lose access to Head Start and early Head Start services, another 2 Pinocchios there. And you had mentioned the concerns about the FAA with furloughs and closed air towers. The verdict is still pending on that. So you have a parade of Pinocchios with an administration at a time when the American people know that so much of their taxpayer dollars are being wasted. And I traveled around Wyoming this past weekend. People at home think at least half of the money they send to Washington is wasted. So it's time now to take an opportunity to eliminate wasteful, duplicative spending. We should streamline federal bureaucracy. We should make government programs more efficient. We should be more thoughtful in terms of how targeted cuts will work to ensure vital programs continue without interruption. But at the end of the day, we should make sure taxpayers are getting value for their hard-earned dollars. The administration doesn't see it that way at all. Instead of promoting responsible spending, the administration is promoting panic. And as Senator Lee has pointed out, the administration is threatening the American people with pink slips for teachers, cuts to airport security, cuts to the Coast Guard patrols, cutting Border Patrol and enforcement, closing national parks, cutting food safety inspections, eliminating Head Start, Meals on Wheels. The list goes on. We need to be honest with the American people that we are $16.5 trillion in debt. It's not a threat. It's the truth. And we can no longer afford to ignore the truth. Washington is burying our children and grandchildren under a mountain of debt. And if we don't treat Washington's spending addiction, the problem's just going to get worse. So we must not allow the debt to tie the hands of future generations and prevent them from reaching their dreams. I believe we have to take responsibility for the reality that we're facing and have to take action to change the course that we're on. And of course that means difficult decisions have to be made, but these decisions don't need to be reckless. They don't need to be dangerous. They don't need to imperil our students, teachers, military, senior citizens, or our national security. They need to be smart, need to be targeted, and they need to maximize the value of each dollar spent and minimize the risks and the burdens to taxpayers. So I believe, to my colleague from Utah, that rather than hitting taxpayers where they'll feel it the most, the administration really has an obligation, I think, a responsibility to work hard to cut spending where the need is the least. And I know the leadership that you've shown on cut this, not that, really is something that I think Americans would just agree with completely.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. And I find it interesting that what you observed on the streets of towns like Evanston and Cheyenne and Gillette in Wyoming is backed up by a recent poll conducted by Gallup. And that poll shows that Americans understand that a lot of money that Washington spends is wasted. This Gallup poll showed that the average American believes that Washington wastes 51 cents out of every dollar that it spends. 51 cents, more than half of every dollar that hardworking Americans earn and send to Washington gets wasted. Congress and the President should be working together to target, reform, reduce, and eliminate wasteful spending that the American people are noticing. And they should be working to get rid of and reform ineffective programs. The President, meanwhile, is threatening to make cuts to government spending, as painful as it can possibly be. Instead of targeting waste, the President's using scare tactics to persuade Americans that cuts have to come first from important services, like law enforcement, national security, Border Patrol, first responders, and educators. Just today, the administration announced that it was going to furlough school teachers who educate the children of military families on U.S. military bases, recognizing, of course, that most school systems are operated at the state and local level and funded primarily at the state and local level. But he started focusing on educators who teach on base to military families, suggesting that those teachers would have to be furloughed. Republicans have a better idea. The Senate Budget Committee, and in particular the ranking Republican serving on the Senate Budget Committee, has found that the cost of President Obama's recent golf vacation with Tiger Woods cost Americans an amount of money that, if saved, would have allowed us to prevent the furlough of 341 federal employees. Can the President cancel a vacation or two in order to avoid some of these furloughs? That's the question that has prompted us to start this information campaign that we refer to as Cut This, Not That, as depicted in this graphic here, showing under Cut This, golf vacations by the President, and under the Not That, showing military-based teachers. That's what we should be focusing on. That's where we ought to prioritize, is on identifying those areas where there can be a lower priority attached to something that we're already spending. Cut This, Not That sends a message to the President and to the American people that Washington should be setting spending priorities rather than wasting their hard-earned tax dollars. So, Senator Barrasso, how can it be that this administration chooses to cut essential services like national security, border enforcement, first responders, and educators, instead of the fraud and waste that's so rampant in the federal government?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I would say that you're absolutely correct. The cuts threatened by the administration simply defy common sense and logic. Despite claims to the contrary, the president actually does have a choice. He can take a thoughtful, reasoned approach to implementing the sequester by cutting wasteful spending, and that we all know exists. Or he can continue to threaten and scare the American people with needless cuts to vital programs and services. I put together a list of a few places where I would encourage the president to look for reasonable cuts, because there are so many programs that are inefficient, ineffective, or just overlap with other programs. You know, there are over 80 economic development programs that operate out of 4 different cabinet agencies: Department of Agriculture, Commerce, Housing and Urban Development, Small Business. There are 173 programs promoting science, technology, engineering, and math education across 13 agencies. Now, these are important things, but do you need 173 programs when one department of the government doesn't know what the other one is doing? 20 agencies oversee more than 50 financial literacy programs. There are more than 50 programs in supporting entrepreneurs across 4 different departments of government. There are 47 different job training programs. And is job training important? Absolutely. 47 different programs, 9 different agencies. It cost $18 billion in fiscal year 2009. Only 5 of the programs of these 47, only 5 of them have had an impact study completed since 2004 to see if they actually work and whether participants in the program actually get a job. These haven't been reviewed since 2004. Do we know that they work? Do we need 47? Could they be improved upon? So, you know, we're looking at this sequester. The president proposed the sequester. The president signed the sequester into law, and now he claims that he can't live with the effects. I'm here to tell you that he's wrong. Responsibly implementing the cuts from the sequester is not only possible, I believe it's necessary, as we see here. Cut this, not that. This debate isn't about, as we read in the Washington Post, that the president is trying to force it into the election of the House of Representatives in 2014. It's about the economy and the future of our country. And it's not just about smaller government, it's about smarter government. People think they're not getting value for their money. So I believe it's past the time for Washington to take the smarter approach to our nation's spending addiction. And I appreciate the leadership of the senator from Utah.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. It's important for us to recognize that all these observations draw us back to one central conclusion, which is that the sequester and wasteful spending that we see so rampant throughout our federal government are the natural product of the failure by the majority leadership in the United States Senate to work with Republicans to pass a budget. Republicans last year in the Senate proposed 3 different budgets, receiving as many as 42 votes, 42 more votes than the president's budget received in this body last year or the year before, or in the House last year or the year before. But the majority party in the Senate, those in charge of this body, elected to lead in this body, have now refused even to propose a budget for the country for more than 1,400 days. We have spending priorities. I'm sure my friends across the aisle have spending priorities as well. It's time that we do the right thing for the American people, and that we sit down and we have an open, honest dialogue with the American people and with each other to hammer out these ideas and come up with a budget that fairly and accurately represents the priorities of the American people. But we need to pass a budget, and I urge my colleagues to do so. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the